Right now, the fiscal cliff. Everybody's taxes set to go up in just over a month if Washington can't get their act together. So President Obama, he was on the trail today, not the campaign trail, but, well, it kind of sort of was, selling his plan just like he was back on the stump. Will we have a deal? We'll get into that tonight. And next, women in combat. Should women be able to serve on the front lines? They're technically barred from direct combat roles, but some say they're filling those roles by default anyway. We're going to talk to a female vet about whether or not women and men should serve side by side. And later, a month after Sandy, our region's still reeling, still trying to pick up the pieces and move on with what could approach normalcy. We're going to have all you need to know where we are 30 days after the worst storm in recent memory. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French, and thanks so much for joining us this Friday evening, November 30th. Now, this just in, no deal still on the fiscal cliff, which means we're now, yes, you see the sign, 32 days till that deadline, and it's fast approaching. So tonight, it appears, at least publicly, like, if anything, we're further away from a deal than we were from when we began the week. And let's bring in our senior political correspondent, Andrew Whitman. He's got more on this, and we have certainly a more assertive president than we did at the beginning of the week, too. That we do, Rich, but it's still not clear whether what we're seeing is spin or an actual hardening of positions in the negotiations on the cliff. But one thing is becoming clear. There's still plenty of work that remains to be done if we're going to avoid that cliff before January 1st. At a toy factory outside Philadelphia today, President Obama warned Congress that Santa, he's not the only one keeping tabs.
I've been keeping my own naughty and nice list for Washington.
There's little agreement on a fiscal cliff deal except for one thing. Negotiations have taken a turn for the worse.
Right now, we're almost nowhere.
If no action is taken by December 31st, $650 billion in cuts to the Pentagon and domestic programs and tax increases will automatically go into effect. The average American family of four would see their taxes go up by about $2,000.
That's a Scrooge Christmas.
Yesterday, Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner offered a plan to bipartisan congressional leaders that included $1.6 trillion in tax increases over the next 10 years, $50 billion in additional stimulus spending, $400 billion in unspecified Medicare cuts over the next decade, and no more debt limit. Unlimited borrowing for the federal government. Republicans declared it dead on arrival. The major sticking point in all of this?
Both parties agree that we should extend the middle-class tax cuts. We've got some disagreements about the high-end tax cuts, right?
That may be an understatement. The White House says any deal must include higher taxes for the wealthiest Americans. Republicans say no way.
Increasing tax rates draws money away from our economy that needs to be invested in our economy to put the American people back to work. It's the wrong approach.
But instead of specifics on the table, we get lines like this one from Harry Reid when asked where the disconnect was between himself and Speaker Boehner.
I don't understand his brain, so you should ask him, okay?
That didn't sound so good, Rich.
No, it didn't. But you're right. How much of this is posturing? How much of this is, basically chicken between now and 12:31 to see who blinks first? All right, let's bring in our panel on this. Dominic, political journalist and author. Retired Lieutenant Colonel Mark Rosen, veteran of the war in Afghanistan, an assistant professor at West Point, and a former congressional candidate in his own right, and Andrew, who you've already met. All right, Dom, over the first 4 years of the Obama administration, he's been called a lot of things, not just by his critics, but Democrats said, when it gets tough, he folds or he kind of distances himself from a fight. He doesn't like to get really, in the up-close personal kind of brass knuckles that is Washington. By every single account, even the Republicans' account, forceful, direct, and the proposal that Geithner brought out there, he doubled down. Now, whether it's a negotiating tactic or he believes he's got leverage right now, if anybody thought the president was going to start where he wanted to end on the negotiation, they got a different Obama. You really get the idea the president thinks he got not only a lot of capital, but maybe even a mandate in November.
It's amazing what an election can do, right? All
Especially
of a sudden,
when you have to run again. Yeah.
That's right. We can have any other election in your lifetime. I don't know, Richard. I've been paying close attention to what the Republicans are saying, and I don't know if this was almost a declaration of war, what the president did yesterday. But I really want to say this because it's almost unfair to the American people. Let's put Democrat aside. Let's put Republican aside for a moment. politics the art of the compromise. There's no compromise anymore. And it's really unfair today, where every couple of months on any given issue, we're scared to death up until the 11th hour of what's going to happen. It's really unfair to the American people. We deserve better.
You know what, though, Andrew? I know, and I was in Dominic's camp even as of yesterday, but I get the sense that the president doesn't view 1231 as necessarily the end of the world. If he doesn't get his deal, think what happens. $5 trillion of cuts and pain occurs. And if you think about it, if you want to talk about leverage, he has more leverage on January 1, politically even, than he does on 1231. Now, I think we'd all agree we don't want to see this happen, okay? I mean, it's not just that the tax cuts go away. They go away on everybody. But also, you got stuff like the unemployment insurance, the extension of it, that goes away. Painful cuts, I'm sure we're going to be talking about in a second, Lieutenant, as results with what would happen with, for example, defense. So the pain gets shared. But if the president is serious, and everybody was, that we got to get our economic house in order, this was never going to be some painless exercise. So this was something that was written down. Everybody knew what was going to happen 12/31 at midnight, this year. So it was purposely put in so they got their act together. I think the president's saying, you got more to lose than I do if you don't come to the table.
Well, and I think he at least has to posture as though he's not afraid to go over the cliff, because otherwise he loses the leverage that he has, which is, go ahead and call my bluff on this. I'll take us over the cliff if need be. But at the same time, he needs to build up how bad the cliff is going to be to keep the pressure on Republicans to say, look, you got to come to a deal. So I think he'd like to get a deal done. I don't think he thinks it would be the end of the world if it didn't.
Let me ask you, Mark, as the resident Republican at the table, people read the president, if not as weak in the first 4 years, Republicans read him as you push and you push and you push, and he'll back off. Do they read a different Obama, or do they think this is all posturing that he'll come back to the table in the next 20 days?
I think this is the same political Obama. Now, what I find the most frustrating and silly about this whole conversation is how irrelevant it is. Is any of this going to fix the multi-trillion-dollar debt that we're going to be hit with? The unfunded obligations that we have in front of us are over $100 trillion, state, local, and federal. Is any of this relevant? And we're talking about taxing the wealthy, which will pay a few days of our deficit. It's absolutely silly. We need real leaders to go back and
the
negotiate.
plan right here is $4 trillion over a decade. And I agree with you. In the end, does that solve the problem? No. But compared to where we are,
not designed to, by the way. Not designed to solve the problem. Not designed to eliminate our debt or our deficit.
Why are we going off a cliff then?
Because we stacked all this stuff up because we couldn't come to agreement on it. So we set up so much pain that Congress had to deal with it. And one of the tools that would go into that would be at least some measure of deficit reduction.
Because we put politics ahead of what's right for our country. And what's right for our country, we should have put the fiscal cliff off the agenda 6 months ago if we had presidential leadership who said, we're not going to play politics with our economy.
It takes two to tango.
The president sets the table for the conversation.
But here's a question that I think most reasonable people don't understand. Why would you protect the interests of the wealthy, just 2%, and ignore the interests of 98% of the population?
This is the brilliance of the tactical politics of it. You've got the effective framing of the argument by the president, the focus on that, while we ignore the forest burning. It's absolutely silly.
Okay, but there is, I think, and Andrew, you looked at this today. The Times did a front page story on it, which was, let's go back to the halcyon days of the Reagan years, okay, where everybody says, morning in America, okay? The math of what people paid in the 80s under Reagan versus what they're paying right now, or even paid under Clinton, people went in their pocket for a lot more.
Well, yeah, for all the complaining that people are doing right now, the Times analysis found out that, most people in America are paying less now under Obama and would continue to pay less under the cliff deal, if that were to come to pass, or at the end of the Bush tax cuts, than they did back in the 1980s. The only group that didn't is our low-end wage earners, the lowest group.
Again, we are in one of the worst recessions still and is increasing taxes at the moment the right thing to do today? You know,
but weren't you just saying the deficit needs to be tackled?
The deficit does need to be tackled.
Let's talk about revenue.
But no one is talking about the spending side. The media is worse at fault here. The pundits are worse. Where's the talk on the spending? Everyone said 6-8 months ago, let's get 3, 4, 5 times spending cuts to tax increase. Who's talking about spending cuts? We're focused on minuscule tax increases for political reasons.
What's the difference between now and then? What's the difference between when we were talking about 10-to-1 ratio of cuts to revenues versus today?
That's my question.
There was an election.
Exactly.
And the American people sided with President Obama's argument.
That is your opinion. The American people did not go in the voting booth and said, I want to raise taxes on every household who makes over $250,000. That's not why they voted for the president.
But he didn't hide it on the campaign trail.
He didn't hide
As a matter of fact, he was quite articulate on that exact point.
Absolutely. But now we need to step back and have leaders who say what's right for the general good of America.
I will tell you this much. We're going to find out, I think, if anything, in the next 2 to 3 weeks, 2 things. Who can better frame the argument about how to bring fiscal sanity back, and who, if all of us, some of us, or who needs to do the sacrificing to get us there, who can better articulate that message and what the American public want. I think one way or the other, everybody's going to be poll testing that answer, and who can put it on a bumper sticker, I think, will help determine the answer. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, this is a debate that isn't about Republican or Democrat, but it's something that's gone back and forth, and now there's a court case that's bringing it to the fore. Women in combat. Should women be not only able to serve in the military, which they do right now, but serve on the front lines? We're going to talk to a female vet about that when we come back. Stay with us.